The engine block has already been stripped. The bits and pieces are just in some boxes and so on. Not sorted, just all together. Nothing's been cleaned. The process I'm going to go through is to actually clean this block. It's got a lot of sludge and muck inside it. The should come up all right. As for all the bits and pieces that have been attached to it, I'll have to clean all those up and sort them out and make sure that I actually have all the bolts necessary to put it back together. So I'll sort them all out and bag them all up. So things like sump bolts, I'll put them in a bag and label them so I know I've got the right number when it comes to assembly. But at this stage I just need to clean it up. It needs to be quite clean before I can start to look at reassembling it. I've just been trial fitting the liners. Before I put them in, of course, I cleaned the inside of the block, removed all the scale. I actually spent a lot of time doing that, scraping it out and then rubbing it out with a scouring brush, even with a small fine wire brush on a drill. So it's fairly clean. I'll still clean it yet again, but what I wanted to do is to trial fit the sleeves. Now these are in without the copper gaskets underneath, and I wanted to see what the gaps were. Now, allowing for the uncompressed gasket, it'll end up being, when I put the gaskets in the bottom there, around 9 thou, 8 to 9 thou. There's only about a thou difference across the cylinders, so I'm quite happy with that. These sleeves do slide in. You don't have to knock them in, or certainly not on this block, but it's a very fine tolerance where the bottom of the sleeve goes through the block, and you have to make sure that's perfectly clean. I used a little bit of WD-40 on the bottom, and then just very carefully slid it down. Now you'll find that it's very easy to get it jammed, so you have to be very gentle movements. Don't force it, just gradually get it down. If it doesn't want to go down, pull it out again, make sure that surface is perfectly clean. I'll use a scouring brush and 1000 grit emery to make sure that was perfectly clean. It doesn't take much to foul it up, so I now know they slide in. As I say, I'll clean them up yet again. I'll take them out now. What I'll be doing first is to fit the crankshaft. I'll put that in next, so I know the top end's pretty clean. I'll just do one final clean before I spin the motor over. Then I'll fit the crank. Once I've got the crank in, then I'll turn it back over, fit the sleeves, pistons, and then I'll progress from there. Now I'm about to install the liners in the motor. It's been cleaned up lots of times. Each time I clean it up I seem to find more stuff accumulated around the sealing edge. It should go in reasonably well. I've got the seals here. I've sprayed them with a copper spray so they'll seal. I've used copper spray before. It seems to work well on copper gaskets. What I'll do is that I'm just videoing, Jimmy. Alright, that's alright, you can stay there. So what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of lubricant in the block around where the sleeves go in. So I'll just put a little bit of WD-40 or the equivalent in around the inside there, so I can slide the sleeve down inside. Just do it in both cylinders at this end. Alright. Now,
Toilet paper.
it's not toilet paper, it's cleaning paper. Now I'll put the copper gasket in.
Are you videoing this and then sending it?
Yes, I'm videoing it. Right, copper gasket's down in place.
Get out of here, ducks.
Now what I have to do is to try and slide the liner in. Just put a little bit more lubricant around the liner. Now these should just slide down in very carefully, of course. Make sure I don't hit the gasket. Right. Now, very carefully slide them in. And I've seen on YouTube different ways of doing this. Some people seem to hammer them in, but I don't think there's any need for that. Okay, that one's in. I'll just put a bit of lubricant around the base of the other one before I drop that in. Not too much, just enough so it doesn't snag up. Now, put that one in very carefully. Okay, it seems to be jamming a bit, so I've obviously not got it straight. You don't want to force these because they should just slide down. If you force it, it means it's not straight. Okay, that seems to be
Done.
pretty right. I'll just make sure that these two flanges here are
Together?
Yep, that's right.
Yee.
Okay, now what you've got to do is to hold them down. Now, okay, that's going to be a problem on that, because the reason it's going to be a problem is it's going to foul up the piston when I try and put the piston in. So I've actually got to remove a bit of the edge of these. So what I'll do, so I've got one for that. One for that one. One for the two of those.
Zigzag.
Yes, it's got a zigzag across. Okay, so I'll just pause the video, and I've got to take just a little bit off the edges of these so I don't foul the pistons when I'm trying to insert those. Video back on. What I've while it was off, I put the other two in. This one was a little bit difficult to get in. Once again, very careful when you slide them in. If they don't go in, pull them out, clean them up again, and keep trying. Eventually it just went down without forcing. The temptation is to get it part way down and it seems to be stuck, and then hit it with a mallet or something. I think then you'd do more damage. Now I've cleaned up these washers so they don't foul the pistons when I put them in. Now I've made up some little pieces here to hold the washers down so I can torque them up. Now that gasket, copper gasket, does have to be basically torqued up a bit anyway, within a few hours of spraying it on. So what I've done is that with these I'll be able to torque it down. I'm not going to torque it down to the final torque setting of the head. I thought I'd do it down to about 50 foot-pounds, which is probably enough just to seal the gasket down. Maybe I'll even do it at 55 foot-pounds, but certainly not the full torque, because I've got to take it back off again anyway, take these off so I can put the head on. I've got the torque wrench set for 50, so I'll just gradually take it down. That's enough. I don't want to torque it down. I mean, I'm assuming that the copper gasket will compress a bit, so I'll leave that for the final torquing of the head. Why do you hold these down? It's covered in the manuals. When you're trying to put the pistons in, if you move the crankshaft around, there's a chance that you'll pop the liner back out. So that's done. What I'll do next is just to install the pistons, and then come back, install the pistons. I'll turn the motor over and fit the bottom end, and then I'll be ready to put the head on. Just one thing before I install these pistons, one thing to remember when you're assembling the pistons is make sure you do everything around the right way. Look at your manual and check it a second time. I mean, when I put the rings in, what I missed was that some of the rings were actually marked top. Now, it may not have made a difference, but had I looked at the rings properly, you do it right the first time instead of trying to go back and redo things. The other thing to remember too is that when you're putting it in, your pistons actually have a front. Obviously they face the front of the motor, that's obvious, but when you're putting the conrod on, that will go on either way, so you need to make sure you actually have it round the right way. In this case it is marked front, but if it wasn't marked front, this split in the piston actually has to face the camshaft side. And when you look at the conrod, you've got the longer sweep of the conrod on the opposite side of the cam, and the cap basically is on the camshaft side. As I say, it will go around the other way, but when you come to fit it, it is round the wrong way. You won't be able to fit it. So just be careful when you assemble these. The other thing, of course, is that these are numbered. Your conrods and your caps are numbered. They should be stamped on there. Make sure you put them in the right order. So that's all. I'll put this together. I won't show that by video. It's fairly straightforward. Now I've just finished torquing up the big end caps. Fairly straightforward process. Make sure you get the torque settings right. Bend the little tabs over. That's all done. The block I've turned over on the engine stand. A little bit of a problem in that this came on the engine stand and it's way out of balance. It probably could have been centralised a lot better, but I'd suggest it was put in the way it is, because the engine stand just slid straight up to the end of the tractor and it was pulled straight out. But having said that, it's incredibly out of balance and hard to turn. Anyway, with the help of my son, I've got it over. I was going to put the sump back on. Before I do that, I've got to replace these felt seals, put them in. I've got them soaking in oil. The key thing with those is make sure you push them in as hard and as compressed as you can. They look longer than they need be, but they will press in a fair way. At the end, don't cut them flush, leave them oversized a little bit, so when you've got the sump going down in the gasket, it will actually provide more compression over the top of that. The oil pump, I've checked the clearances in the old pump. They were very worn, so I've got a new impeller to go in there. The oil flow in this motor has obviously been a problem, particularly with the wear I found in the rocker cover and the rocker pads. The oil obviously wasn't getting to the top of the motor. That's why I checked the oil pump. The oil pump was very worn, so the oil pressure was low, even though the gauge is still reading high. Not connected, so the gauge was faulty. Had a discussion with someone the other day about the importance of oil, coolants and air, all of which are relatively cheap. Oil for the engine, if you don't replace it, you don't look after it, you can end up with major problems. Coolants, same with the engine, end up with corrosion, overheating problems and problems with the engine. And air, of course, air for the tyres. If you look after those three simple things in terms of maintenance, you can avoid some major problems. But anyway, going ahead with this, I'm about to replace the oil pump, put those seals in there. These seals I did a while ago. I've left them oversized at the moment. I've compressed those in as far as I could when I put it on. The end result is they're sticking up obviously too high. I won't cut that flush with the block, same as these rear seals. A little bit oversized, so when the sump is on it will compress down. I won't video the process, fairly straightforward. So this stage, all this goes on, and I'll see where I go from there. And one thing I forgot to mention was about those felt seals. I did soak them in oil, that's true, overnight actually. Once they were thoroughly soaked, I then, I just had them in this, I then pulled them out, squeezed the oil out just in a paper towel. There's, not all of it, but most of the oil out, the loose oil. Then put them in there, back in there, and I just happened to use some aviation gasket. The composition of this, anyone that's used it before, it's got a unique smell, and having the felt seals already soaked with oil, this just absorbs straight in. So all I did was just dab it along the top, make sure it covered them. As I say, it soaked straight into the seal itself. Then I poked the seals down the holes in the block just with this piece of brass tube. Even though the seals are very long, they do go all the way in. Just make sure you compress it all the way down. With the oil and the gasket compound, it actually oozes out the top, so you have to continually wipe up the mess, but it makes sure that everything is it's easy to push in because it's lubricated, and having that gasket sealant in there, once it's down in there and compact, it will then solidify and make a very good seal against the block. So I just forgot to mention that. Oil pump went on fine, but I encountered a problem when I went to put the gasket on. Now what I found was the gasket actually didn't line up with the holes. Well, certainly it did across the back of the motor, but the further I went forward, it was at least half a hole out by the time I got halfway up the block. The gasket in the gasket kit was not rolled up but folded up, and it appears to have shrunk a bit. Now I thought perhaps it was the wrong gasket, but when I put some tension, held it at the rear and pulled the tension forward, it actually started to line up. So what I've done, I've gradually pulled it forward, so I've been able to get all of the bolts through the holes. I've been around the gasket with a piece of damp paper, absorbent paper, and just pressed down, and it's not soaked, but it's just a little bit damp. I'll probably do it again, it's not quite damp enough yet, and with it already lined up against the holes, I'm hoping if I leave it overnight it will have sufficiently basically stretched and reset itself when it dries. So yeah, a bit of a shock. I thought it just was nowhere near fitting, and by the time, you know, from this end of the block to the other, it was almost not lining at all with any of the holes across the front, and I thought perhaps it was the wrong gasket, but it's not, it's just shrunk. Now I don't know how long this gasket has sat, because I got this tractor in pieces with the all the gasket material in its own boxes, but maybe they've been sitting there for years and subject to moisture and so on, and they've shrunk. So just something. Just thought I'd show what I've done and how I've tried to overcome it. Now I mentioned I was having trouble lining up this sump gasket. The stretching process I did almost got it right, but when I removed the bolts it moved back again. And my son-in-law gave me a very good solution to it, and what he said was just make up a few studs, which I did, just out of bolts. Cut a bit of a slot on the top so I could undo them with a screwdriver, and then put the studs around evenly around the gasket. Put the gasket on, that will hold the gasket in place. Put the sump over the top of the studs, so the studs need to be long enough, and then everything will be lined up, and it works perfectly. So if ever you have a situation where you're trying to line up all of these holes, and usually you poke a Phillips head screwdriver down the hole to try and line them up, this is a far better method. Put them in, you can line it up before you put the sump on, and works extremely well. So I suggest you even try that. Just another simple solution. Installing the oil filter, you have to actually make sure the feed pipe goes into the end, and to do that, certainly the feed pipe on mine just flops around, so you've actually got to be able to line it up to go in the end of the hole. Now I can do that by, and I haven't put the gasket on yet, but what I do is I put a little bit of bent tie wire around the end of the tube. It enables me to hold that tube up because it keeps dropping down, and then just slide it in. Simple. Otherwise you muck around trying to position it and then find you knock it and it drops down and doesn't line up. Easier of course when the engine's upside down. Don't know what you do with this up the other way, but maybe it's just the reverse. Stick something through and hold it up. Just a simple solution.